Welcome back to my Northwest Coast Ethnobotany class. We're at Woodstock Farm, which is a fairly new city park with the Bellingham City Park System, just at the beginning of Chuckanut Drive in Bellingham. And if you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to come here on your own time. Maybe you could see some of the plants we're going to be talking about. But this week our unit is on medicinal plants, and so we will be exploring as many different medicinal plants as we can find. And I'm here with Jasmine Yoder, who is very interested in medicinal plants and a graduate of Whatcom Community College and one of my first ethnobotany students. And now she's gone on to graduate. You want to say a bit about your studies?
Sure. I graduated from Western just a couple months ago with a biology degree in evolution, ecology, and organismal biology, and a minor in Salish Sea Studies.
The first ever Salish Sea Studies minor graduate.
That's correct, yes.
So maybe one of these days you'll be in her position and helping me out with COVID-19 field trip videos. Anyway, we're going to check out, I already see some Devil's Club down the hill. We'll go talk about that first. So let's get started. Okay, we made it down the slope to the Devil's Club. The Devil's Club has these giant leaves that look a little bit like maple leaves, except they're covered in thorns, and the petiole is totally covered in thorns, and the stem is also covered in huge thorns, and they always seem to be growing in places where you have to do a little bit of bushwhacking and you're tempted on a steep slope to grab one of them to pull your way up the slope. But you don't want to do that because the thorns can be really irritating. They don't actually irritate everybody, they don't seem to bother me too much, but they do stick into your hands and hurt, and some people have an allergic reaction and will have like a red spot for days after they get pricked by a Devil's Club. Now it tends to grow in kind of rich, moist forests, usually in areas with moist soil but well-drained soil, and I think that's why they're often found on slopes, because the water doesn't stay there for a really long time, especially north-facing slopes are a little bit more moist. And let's see what else. Well, some of the traditional uses. This plant is, I think, one of the most important medicinal plants up and down the coast. And usually it's the roots and the bark that are used. And here in Coast Salish territory, the bark is often used as a cold treatment, steeps to make a tea for colds. And then one other use I just want to mention is further north, the Kwakwaka'wakw will take the stems, peel them, and put them above their door, the peeled stem, as a charm to keep out evil spirits. So Jasmine knows more about the medicinal uses of this plant, so I'll let her take it from here.
So another name for Devil's Club is American ginseng. It's not a true ginseng. It's ginseng's genus is Panax, and this is Oplopanax. So there is a difference. It's kind of like pseudotsuga versus tsuga, right? So there's been some issues with over-harvesting of Devil's Club, so it's important to consider that if you're wanting to go out and have fun harvesting from this formidable plant. Just keep it in mind that it is sort of endangered in our area, just respect it. But the inner bark is, it's hard to collect, but you can do it, and I'm just going to show you real quick how hard it is. So there's a lot of spiky, lots of prickles on here, but basically you just slide your knife like that, cut it off, and then if you can see, there's a green inner bark, and the aroma of this is really, really nice. It's very, I don't know, how would you describe it? Foresty? It's kind of astringent.
It's really aromatic.
Very aromatic. But anyway, so you would peel the prickles off of this, I guess you would call them spines. Peel the spines off of the bark, and then all you're left with is the inner bits. It's white and green, and that would be dried. You can steep it in a tea to treat fevers and flu and cold symptoms. It's also good for making into a poultice. Like if you make a really strong tea, which is known as a decoction, you can stick a rag or a towel in that decoction and wrap it around painful joints that are sometimes associated with rheumatoid arthritis. It's mostly used for pain from arthritis and fevers and such, but there are a wide range of uses. It's a blood tonic, it's a birth control. We just learned that it can treat insanity, so keep that in mind in this day and age. And oh, that's perfect. This is the medicinal part. And some people use the roots, and this particular specimen doesn't have a lot of runners, but there's usually a mother devil's club coming up, which might be this one. It's the tallest one, but you want to look at the root base, and I call it the mother because it's obviously the biggest and the oldest, and then it's shooting out runners. So if you were to collect the roots, you would want to get one from the runner and not the mother, because you could end up killing the whole clan. Other than that, again, like for pain, you can treat headaches. I think it's good for nausea as well. The list really goes on and on with this plant. It's highly medicinal.
Yeah, further north, the Kwakwakiwak often use it as a diabetes medication and a heart medicine. It's widely regarded as one of the most potent medicines around. All right, another good medicinal plant here, edible as well, and a beverage plant is the trailing blackberry. And I think we learned this one already, but a few features. It often has this greenish, whitish stem, sometimes a little bit purplish, with a white wax on it. The prickles are very fine, and I often think of it a little bit like nature's razor wire or barbed wire, because you're walking through the woods and they grab your ankles, and if you're wearing shorts, you get kind of scraped up. But it has 3 leaflets or trifoliate leaves, and this plant is not an evergreen, but the leaves do overwinter. So this is this year's leaf. You can see it's a bright green, and this is actually last year's leaf, and it'll die soon and then fall off. So rather than losing their leaves in the fall, they tend to lose their leaves the following summer. So the leaves live for over a year. And you can see that it's a little bit purple tinged. And this is actually the better stage to harvest it as a tea plant, at least. There are more phytochemicals in there, and with plant medicines, generally you're after those phytochemicals. So the older the tissues are, generally the more concentrated the phytochemicals are going to be. Now, sometimes those phytochemicals are really bitter and terrible tasting, but in the case of this plant, they're actually wonderful tasting, and so you can steep them in water and make a beverage. One of my favorite tea plants. How about its medicinal uses?
Well, this plant is in the rose family, and you can remember that roses typically have astringent qualities, which means it has anti-inflammatory properties, and it tightens tissues. So if you were to have a burn, you could apply a strong tea or decoction to the burn, and it would help sort of seal it up, like help the wound not spread, because there's always heat that's involved with burns that can like make it irritated around the actual wound. So applying an astringent tea to it can help just reduce the spread of heat. And it's also an antiseptic, and it can be used as a mouthwash for canker sores or toothaches associated with infection. And it's also, for its antiseptic qualities, you can use it for psoriasis. So you could make an oil, or like if you make a tea, a strong tea, and then a tincture rather. Let's skip the oil because there's not a lot of volatile oils in this plant. Make a strong tea and then tincture it in alcohol and combine those things, and then apply that to psoriasis. Then you would get some benefits out of that. It would reduce the spread of psoriasis. But yeah, other than that, just roses have astringent properties, and I don't think very many roses are poisonous. You can certainly bet your dollar that it's going to be safe to consume and have those properties that I just named.
So we have a lot of members of the rose family: salmonberry, thimbleberry, are more kind of herbaceous, but then some tree members of the rose family too that have similar medicinal uses. So ocean spray, hawthorn, and then of course the rose itself. We have Nootka rose and bald-hip rose. So we'll probably see a few other members of the rose family. Maybe we'll just keep those descriptions for the use discussion of them. Will kind of be repetitive, but I'll point out some if we haven't studied them already. Okay, beside me is a tree, and I don't think we've actually learned this tree yet. Now, you might recognize the maple shape of the leaf. It actually is a maple. It also has opposite leaves, like all maples. And then it has these seeds called Samara is the technical name. A Samara is just a specialized seed that is dispersed by wind because it has these little wing structures on them. So they kind of, when they're mature, they spin as they fall in kind of a helicopter-like motion. But Douglas maple is usually found in sunnier slopes, forests that have a lot of opening. I see them on Sumas Mountain a lot. They're really common in the Chuckanut Mountains. They're often found along the fringe of treeless meadows in the Salish Sea lowlands. Now, one medicinal use for the Douglas maple is the bark. It's used by the Saanich and others as an antidote for poisoning. So I think they, again, make a decoction out of the bark, steep it in water essentially, and drink it as an antidote. Now, you may be starting to notice that a lot of the medicines we're talking about are bark medicines. Now, bark medicines are really common along the northwest coast area. There are some leaf medicines and berry medicines and things like that too, but I think the majority of the medicines are bark medicines. Oh, roots, of course, are important too. Okay. Here is a dainty flowered rose. I often identify this one from a distance just by its small flowers that tend to be more of a purple color rather than, or kind of a dark pink, purple pink. This is called bald-hip rose, and it's called bald-hip rose because later in the year when it forms the fruit, that's called the hip, and most rose hips have sepals that stick around on the very tip of the crow's calling, very tip of the hip. But the bald hip, those sepals fall off later in the year. So good identifying features are the small flower and also the stem, which is covered with very fine prickles. Now we have another lowland rose species that is very common on the coast, called the Nootka rose. And we can see that the Nootka rose flower has petals that are a lot bigger. When the hip forms, it has these really long sepals that stay attached to the tip of the rose hip, and the hips are like twice the size of bald hip rose. They can be maybe 3/4 of an inch long and 1/2 inch wide or something like that. And anyway, both roses smell amazing, and you can eat the petals of both rose species. You could also eat the hips, but you want to be careful not to eat the seeds because the seeds have these really sharp hairs that are almost like fiberglass, and they will irritate your bowel. Some folks say they give you itchy bottom because they irritate your whole intestine tract all the way down. Okay. Oh, and another, so we could compare the bald hip stem, which has all those prickles, to the Nootka rose stem. And on a young Nootka rose stem, it might not have any prickles, but as they get older, the prickles are going to be just at the base of the leaves. So there aren't any on this, but an older stem will have 2 prickles right at the base of the leaves. So there's always a pair, whereas these are found throughout the stem. So look for the bald hip more in like dry forests, and the Nootka rose on coastlines especially. How about its medicinal use?
This is one of my favorite medicinal plants. In the winter, you start to, well, actually in the fall, there's the rose hips, which I'm sure people have noticed them before, but they're these bright red, shiny seeds or fruits. You typically want to harvest the hips after the first frost because they get a little sweeter, so they taste a little better in tea. And like Abe said, you can eat them. They're a little bit tedious to eat, but you could like munch on it, I guess, like when you're going on a little hike. But yeah, I have heard also that you're not supposed to eat the fiberglass-like insides of the fruit, but I've also heard that some people can handle it, so I guess it's up to whether or not you want to take that risk. As far as making tea, you don't have to take out the fiberglass bits inside. You could risk it. I risk it. I don't have an issue, but if I was going to serve it to somebody else, then I might want to just take the flesh off. So anyway, the flesh of rose hips are extremely potent in vitamin C. They have more vitamin C than a citrus fruit has. Just one hip has more vitamin C than a whole navel orange. So using it in a tea in the winter to combat the flu or a cold or anything like that is really good. I typically mix it with other fruits like elderberry, which hopefully we will find later so we can identify that for you and talk about it a little bit. But this particular medicine is really, if you mix it, instead of just in water, if you mix it with honey and vinegar, the medicinal constituents will actually come out into solution better. And that particular medicine is called an oxymel. It's half honey, half vinegar, and both of those two things are medicinal in their own right. But putting the vitamin C into that is going to be a really good cough medicine throughout winter. And it tastes really good. And you can also just eat the buds of the flowers too and get some vitamin C like Eve showed you. Just eating the petals, it has trace vitamin C in it.
Several years ago, Nancy Turner was compiling basically her life's work, names of different plants of, in all the different languages up and down the coast. And she found that roses have names in every single language, and a few other plants are so widely used and named than rose. So she thinks that rose, it just has a lot of significance in our culture for its beautiful flowers and aroma. It has perhaps different significance more as a plant medicine up and down the coast, but it's prized across a wide region. All the species are prized.
Here's the lao, which you guys have already learned. It's got the leathery leaves, kind of alternating leaf habit. The fresh or the new leaves on this they're actually edible, but they're often not very good. It's okay. That one was actually pretty good. It's got a sour flavor to it, but sometimes it can be really bitter. You have to get it at the right time. But anyway, this plant, its leaves can actually be used as a medicine, and it is a good anti-inflammatory and antiseptic, as well as it has astringent qualities. So like I was talking about with the blackberry, and could have mentioned with the rose we just looked at, it has that astringent medicine that you can use on burns, and if you have stomach, if you have a stomach infection or whatever that's causing diarrhea, you could consume a rose or a salal tea and help tighten the tissues in your intestines and help with that problem. This is good for canker sores and toothaches, and it also has a medicinal use for burns and sores. So the Quileute would actually chew the leaves and then spit it out on their sores, and then the clallam would do the same thing but apply it to burns. It's a very useful plant, very yummy berries sometimes. Some people think that they're the best all the time, but I think that they can be kind of bland and need to be mixed with other things.
One more use, sort of a dorky use, but it can be used as sunscreen. Literally a screen to keep the sun off of you. No. I find that if I'm like canoeing, the only place I ever get sunburned is my nose. And if you wear glasses like me, you could take and make a little nose protector with the salal leaf.
Oh my goodness, that's ingenious.
You don't need a hat, you just need a nose protector.
Yeah.
And glasses.
Perfectly nose shaped.
Here we have a Oregon grape. This is the dull Oregon grape, or short Oregon grape. We could recognize it by, or differentiate it from the tall Oregon grape by the number of leaflets that it has. It has usually, I don't know, 12 or 14 or something like that, or maybe an odd number. 13 or 17 or something like that leaflets. Yeah. And you can see the leaves are still kind of emerging. Another difference is that at the base of the leaves, this whole thing is a leaf, there are these bud scales that persist on the stalk, whereas the tall Oregon grape doesn't have these bud scales at all. And the tall Oregon grape isn't always tall, so the best way to recognize that are the leaves that just have usually 6 or 7 or 9 leaflets, and the leaflets are shinier, and the spines tend to stick up and down a little more like a holly leaf, whereas the spines on the dull Oregon grape are basically all pointing directly out. I'll mention a few edible uses, and then Jasmine will tell you a bit about the medicinal uses. I find, like Jasmine was mentioning, the young salal leaves you can nibble on. I enjoy nibbling on these young dull Oregon grape leaves, and they're delightfully sour. The tall Oregon grape you could also nibble on, but I find them to be a little too bitter to enjoy. And here is a cluster of fruit. They're not ripe yet, but when they are ripe, you could eat the berries. They're also very sour. You could eat the flowers in the spring too, and they're also very sour. Everything about this plant is pretty sour. Yeah, so it is edible, but I tend to eat it more as like a mouth freshener or kind of a novelty trailside pucker than as a food.
This plant is actually highly medicinal. It has a compound in it called berberine, and that's where it gets its name. Berberine nervosa is what we're looking at here. Berberine is a yellow compound that you can find in golden seal and gold thread, as well as turmeric. And all of those are really potent medicinal plants as well. But to show you where it is, I'll just take off a little bit of bark. And this plant is a little pokey. It's sort of reminiscent of holly. But if you look in here, actually I can just take this off. This is just some of the bark. I just took it off similar to how I did with Devil's Club. And that chemical in there is, it's been studied clinically, and it's been shown to be an AMPK activator. So for all you biologists out there, that has a lot of important pathways that it starts for cancer and diabetes and metabolism. And so if you were to use berberine as a medicine, you would be using it for its anti-tumor properties, for lipogenesis and ketogenesis, which helps in lowering cholesterol and actually weight balance, so losing weight, fat loss. It's good for diabetes because of that MK pathway that berberine affects. And what else? It's high cholesterol. It's an antioxidant, so there's actually anti-aging properties that it has too. So applying it topically and also consuming it as a tea would be beneficial. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. This one has a lot of properties similar to Devil's Club that it's well worth looking into and seeing exactly how berberine has helped heal people in multiple ways, especially with diabetes and high cholesterol.
For comparison, this is the tall Oregon grape, and this individual does happen to be fairly tall. It's also growing a few feet above me. But we can see the number of leaflets that it has, 2, 4, 6, 7, 2, 4, 6. Usually it's an odd number, 2, 4, 6, 7. Yeah. And how the spines, they kind of stick up and down, alternating. Yeah, so similar uses as the dull Oregon grape, but if you're going after the bark, I guess you can probably get more from the tall Oregon grape because it tends to be a bigger plant. And also next to me here, this is kind of curious. The soil here is filled with shells, and it looks very dark, almost black. You can see up here, especially where it hasn't been disturbed, it's almost pure shells. This is actually a midden, an ancient garbage pile, essentially, back when garbage was all local, came from the earth. And shells take a long time to decompose especially when they're not in the salt water, because they don't redissolve. So this was an old village site a long, long time ago. And, these are protected sites, so I can't just come and root through here. They're protected by law. All right, no surprise that there are a lot of culturally significant plants here. And here's one, another different species. This is a willow, and willows are very medicinal.
Yeah, willows have actually been used for thousands and thousands of years by people for pain relief and anti-inflammatory purposes. So you might even know that aspirin is derived from salicylic acid, and this is the Salix species in the Salicaceae family. It is the #1 pain relieving medicine that someone could use out in the bush. So how you would do that actually, if anybody's ever tasted aspirin on their tongue when they take it at home, it has that really gross astringent flavor. If you just barely bite down on a leaf, old or new, you get the same flavor. So you could steep a tea with the leaves, but where the medicine is actually hiding is in the bark. And you could take the bark from a twig or from the actual trunk of the tree, and you would just mix that in water and drink it. You wouldn't want to do it for a very long time, so if you had like chronic pain, you wouldn't want to drink it every single day for more than a month or something, because it does have some toxicity to it. But it is relatively safe, and it is very effective. Oh, and I guess all of the members of Salicaceae have this quality, but willow does have the most potent medicine of all of them. So let's see, who else is in Salicaceae? I'm drawing a blank.
Cottonwood.
Cottonwood, yes. So hopefully we'll find one of those later. Yeah, an aspen, that's right.
I'm going to attempt to pull a little bit of bark off of the willow here. And willow is one of those species that is very vigorous. If I were to cut this down, like here, we can see that somebody cut this stem off and that it is resprouted. So this is a prime candidate for management. And if I were to, I don't need bushels of bark medicine, but if I were to want to use the twigs for making a fish weir, I would want a lot of these long straight suckers, or if I was making a net from the willow bark, having a lot of those suckers would be good. And since the bark can be used both for medicine and for fiber, which we talked about last week, I'm going to just demonstrate how you could peel a little section of bark off. Now, birch, when it likes to peel around the in this direction, and cherry, but most other barks, they prefer to peel vertically. And this is a good time of the year because the sap is flowing, and you can see that it comes off really quite easily. So
Beautiful.
now it's the inner bark that we would want for basket weaving, or sorry, cordage making. And I could, can you hold that end? I could take my knife and actually scrape off the outer bark. It's this inner bark that is better for cordage making. So if I were to make a cordage, I would want to split it into thinner pieces, or to make twine, thin enough pieces that I could roll them. And one way to do that is to just cut it in long strips. This is essentially the raw material, or you could just take the bark and dry it out and steep it and make your medicinal tea. Your aspirin.
Yes, it's very flexible.
Alright, we saw the bald hip rose earlier, and I had picked a specimen of the Nootka rose, but this is actually a Nootka rose habitat here, right next to the ocean. And this one is mature enough that we can see some of the thorns along the stem in pairs, especially at the base of the leaves. There's two thorns right now, right there. That smells so good. There's a nice little patch of silverweed here, which is a plant that has these pinnately divided leaves, with the underside is very silvery, and it has yellow flowers. They look like buttercup, but it's another member of the rose family. And I want to tell you a story about the silverweed, a story shared with me by Clan Chief Adam Dick, Quaxistala, the member, I think the first or second unit. I showed a film about his life. Well, this story is about these three blind women that were went to the mouth of the Kinkum River, the Guai River they call it, and they were harvesting the roots of silverweed because they're an edible root, best harvested in the late fall as the leaves are dying back. Anyway, this story took place thousands of years ago, and at the time there was a character called Kanikalak, and many people refer to him as the Transformer. And the three women were really nervous about encountering Kanikalak because they were worried that they might turn him into a rock or an animal or something like that. But they decided to go harvest their silverweed roots anyway. So they were down there harvesting, and along came Kanikalak, and he asked them what they were doing, and they said, "Oh, we're harvesting silverweed roots." And he said, "Well, can I have some?" So they said sure, and they gave him some roots, and he chewed them up in his mouth and spit out the pulp and rubbed it on their eyes, and he cured them of their blindness. And immediately, once they could see, they recognized that he must be Ganikalak, the transformer, and they were really scared and they tried to get away. But before they could, he grabbed them by the necks and he threw them up into the air and turned them into ducks, into mallards. And that's basically the end of the story. But you know, we've been learning a lot about traditional ecological knowledge in this class, and this story contains some really interesting traditional ecological knowledge. So it tells about how this plant grows at the mouth of rivers, and you know, Woodstock Farm is essentially at the mouth of Chuckanut Creek, I think it is. Yeah, Chuckanut Creek. And here we find the plant. It likes growing in really fine sediments. It can tolerate salt inundation. The story also tells about this relationship between the plant and waterfowl. So ducks and geese actually really like eating the foliage and the roots of this plant. And it tells us a little bit about how, well, one thing that I think it hints at is that ducks and geese can take off really steeply in the air, like almost like somebody's throwing them up into the air. And they're also, they also have really good eyesight. And why do they have good eyesight? Well, because they were given good eyesight by, or the ability to see by Ganikalak, this transformer character. Now it goes even deeper for this particular story because not only are the silverweed roots edible by both humans and waterfowl, but the roots are actually used as a poultice for the eyes and actually other inflamed tissues by the Kwakwakiwak and a number of other Northwest Coast indigenous peoples. So this is another member of the rose family, and like Jasmine was saying, a lot of the members of the rose family they contain astringent phytochemicals that are really good at restoring or tightening vasculature, so they tone smooth muscles, and that toning helps with circulation, and circulation is important for healing things, and so you put a toning agent on an infection, it'll help bring circulation to the infection, and it's the blood that contains the white blood cells and all that help the body's immune response. So I love that story because it's a simple story, but it contains so much traditional ecological knowledge. And I also studied the silverweed root for my master's degree, so I'm pretty fond of the plant. This is the arbutus or madrona tree, and the bark is very peely, and this bark is used by the Saanich as a medicine. They actually mix it with 9 other barks to make a medicine for tuberculosis. So easy one to collect, although you probably shouldn't be peeling off bark unless it comes off really easily on its own. So that's the drone.
This is a Douglas fir tree, and it produces a nice fragrant pitch that can be used medicinally. You can put it on open wounds or on burns, and it helps seal the wound, and it's very it's antimicrobial, so it's going to keep out infection, and it's also going to draw infection out. So it does have this drawing property that you could apply to slivers. You could actually make a salve out of it, which is basically just mixing pitch warming up the pitch, filtering it through cheesecloth, and then adding it to melted beeswax to make sort of a diluted pitch medicine that you can carry around with you, and it's not as sticky. It doesn't refuse to come off of your fingers. And you could use that for bug bites and drawing out slivers and the like, burns, like I mentioned. So really good to have in your first aid kit when you're camping. And you could just use it right off the tree. But as you can see, it's got some debris in it, and now this is just going to be on my fingers for the rest of the day. So that's okay. It's very nice smelling. Yeah, highly medicinal.
Here I have Yerba Buena. What a nice sounding plant. Buena, of course, meaning good. Yerba meaning herb. Good herb. Anyway, this plant makes a delightful tea. I guess I've only had it once, but it smells delicious, and I can imagine it would be a good tea. And sometimes the tea is used medicinally as well, mainly for colds. And evidently, hunters on Vancouver Island would rub their body with the plant to mask their human odor before they went like hunting deer. And that's no surprise either, because it does have a really great fragrance. So, Yerba Buena. Good tea.
Right here we have a patch of bleeding heart. Very pretty plant. I'm going to resist picking any of the flowers because they're too pretty to pick. But as you can see, they have heart-shaped petals, and they have sort of this carroty looking. Oh my goodness, did you see that? The bumblebee landed directly on the flower I pointed at. Anyway, the roots of this plant are very medicinal. In order to get the roots, you would have to kill a few plants, but they do grow in a cluster. So you could find a cluster and take a fraction of it, and not kill the colony. So anyway, the roots have analgesic properties, which means good for soothing pain. So if you have a sprain or a bruise or some kind of soreness in your joints, you can wrap that area up in a strong tea, like a rag dipped in strong tea, or you can make a tincture, which is just an alcohol solution, an extract, and apply that to the sore area. This plant was called toothache medicine by the Skagit, and it is good for helping with toothaches just by chewing on the root or swishing around a strong tea in your mouth. Yeah, I think that's about all I know about this plant, but I haven't used it myself because I'm careful not to pick the prettiest flowers for their medicine. I just use something else.
Well, now we're in a sunny spot in Bellingham. This is the Paddon Creek Lagoon. There's a little restoration site here that has some really cool plants, just kind of at the end of, or near the Bellingham ferry terminal on Harris Street. And one of the cool plants that's here, and isn't really, I mean, it's native to Western Washington, but more commonly found out in the islands, is this bare stem desert parsley, sometimes called Indian consumption plant. Now that's a good hint at its ethnobotanical use, consumption being tuberculosis, which a lot of, at the time of contact, the Native Americans here didn't really have any natural immunity to diseases like tuberculosis and measles and influenza. It's a pretty noisy site here, but I'm just going to push on through. Not only is this a great medicine, but it has some culinary uses too. So these leaves are delicious, and earlier in the spring they're delicious. Later in the year, like now, even though it's still spring, but the plant is just about done with everything it's going to do this year. The leaves get a little tougher, and they still are good as seasoning. So it has a strong celery-like flavor and can be used like celery seed or celery in a soup. And the seeds as well you can nibble on. And so this plant is another one of those highly medicinal plants. Not only is it used for tuberculosis, but the seeds are chewed on as a kind of like a lozenger to help with a sore throat, used for colds. People singing all night long, if their voice was starting to feel strained, say like me, I'm having to talk over jet planes and traffic, hard on the voice, I could nibble on one of these seeds, and I nibbled too strongly. It's very potent. Anyway, I could just barely nibble, and it'll soothe my throat and help me sing or blab longer. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, it is just, I mean, you basically said it all, except for the one thing that it does is it's an antiviral, so it has aromatic compounds within its seeds and its leaves that prevent the replication of viruses and the shedding of viruses. So you can use it for flus and colds and stuff like that. So it actually reduces the amount of time that you're sick during the flu. And I guess I'll just add to, like, as far as like the throat and the lung uses go, is it's also caused by aromatic resins, and they're called expectorants, and they help form mucus, and then that when you're sick it helps like draw out bacteria and viruses and stuff, and you can cough it out better. But the formation of mucus in the throat is soothing as well.
And then all around us is another great medicinal plant called kinnikinick. And I mentioned kinnikinick when we were studying leaf anatomy because it has an obovate leaf, which means that it's broader at the tip than it is at the base. And right now it is fruiting, so it has these kind of like apple colored fruit. And they're actually edible, but they're a little bit mealy. They ripen to more of a uniform red color. And kinnikinick is used as a, the dried kinnikinick leaves are mixed with some other leaves and smoked, and it has a variety of other medicinal uses that I'll let Jasmine talk about.
Yeah, actually the smoking of the leaves is supposed to be medicinal, not just for pleasure. It's supposed to help with bronchitis symptoms, which seems a little counterintuitive, so I'm not sure how well that works, but that is something that I've read about. I think that it would probably be better to inhale the steam instead of smoke harsh chemicals when you have bronchitis. But anyway, the leaves themselves are medicinal for other reasons in a tea. You can use them to treat urinary tract infections because they have antiseptic qualities as well as astringent, so anti-inflammatory. And there's a chemical in this plant called arbutin, and arbutus always reminds me of the bear, or arbutus. This plant is also called bearberry. So arbutin is a compound that will it'll affect the tyrosine kinase receptors in your cells, and that'll it makes it so the enzyme that's responsible for producing melanin in your skin is inhibited. So if you have hyperpigmentation or acne that's bothersome, so that when you're out in the sun you get darker spots faster than the rest of your skin, you can apply a salve of this plant's leaves and apply it over you with your sunscreen, and hopefully prevent the blotchiness that's caused by hyperpigmentation.
That's the kinnikinick, a plant I love because it has a palindromic name, provided you spell it rightly, correctly.
It's fun to say, fun to spell. Also, another name that maybe some people have heard is uva ursi. That's another common name for this one.
Well, here we have yarrow, Y-A-R-R-O-W, or Achillea millifolia. Millifolia meaning millions of leaves, or thousands of leaves at least. Now, they don't actually have thousands of leaves, but the leaves are divided, so they have thousands of leaflets, I suppose you could say. Highly divided. And this plant is really medicinal and aromatic too. You could make a tea out of it that I think has a nice flavor, but it's not a tea that you'd want to drink every single day because I think it's hard on your liver. But those same phytochemicals that might be hard on your liver with prolonged use can actually have a lot of beneficial medicinal properties. So, about some of those?
Yeah, so it does have an effect on the gastrointestinal tract. If you are suffering from diarrhea or dysentery, then yarrow would be able to help aid in the recovery from those symptoms. It's also very good for pain in any part of the body. You can apply it topically or you can consume it as a tea. So good for toothaches and stomach aches. It has astringent qualities, and as I mentioned, I think already, the anti-inflammatory qualities. It's also an anti-hemorrhage medicine. So if you have a small cut, you can actually take off one of the leaves and crush it. I guess maybe a couple, just picked a really small one. Crush it up, and maybe even like put it in your mouth and chew it so it has some moisture to it, and then put it on the cut and hold it there, and it'll stop the bleeding. There's also another plant that does that just as well that grows around it called Herb Robert, which we might not talk about because it's not native, but pick it over yarrow because it's not native and it's noxious. Other than that, this is a good plant for fevers and colds as well as hay fever. So if you have a sinus infection from allergies, this is a good one to mix. It would be really good to mix with nettles, actually. It'd be a very potent medicine. Forgetting anything?
No. All right, well, that will conclude the unit on medicinal plants. And actually, this is the last field trip that I'm going to do. Kind of turning the ball over to you all, because you're going to be producing your videos for your ethnobotany projects and sharing those on Canvas. So I look forward to seeing the other side of the video camera, so to speak. And really excited to see what you all produced. Maybe even a few of you, I know a few of you are doing some medicine related projects. But because this is the last chance I'm going to get to speak with you over this format, I just wanted to thank you all for taking this class and sticking with this unusual virtual field-based learning experience. I know it can never be an absolute substitute for actual field time, but most of the places that I've taken you are opening up now, so you could go there on your own and maybe watch the field trip again. If you want to get more from this class, the recordings are still there. You could watch the field trip again and go to the site and review some of the plants on your own. But really my goal through this class has been not so much just teaching you about the plants, but also trying to get you to think about Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest and their culture, and how they have an important legacy and they continue to have a presence here, and how we can be allies and support them, but also some lessons that we can perhaps transfer to our own society, our own culture, lessons about stewarding the earth more responsibly, having a greater sense of place. And so I hope you will continue to think about those and continue to find ways to find inspiration from the natural world, and draw lessons from the natural world. So thank you all. I'm kind of rambling now, but thank you all for tuning in. And I don't really know what any of you look like because I haven't met you in person, but you've been seeing me for several hours, hopefully not hours that you are arduous to you. But if you see me on the street or something, please say hi and mention that you took my ethnobotany course, because part of the reason I'm a teacher is I enjoy the student contact, and this has been a difficult term for me because I haven't really had much student contact, but I value you as a student and would love to hear from you if we ever bump into each other face to face. So, thanks again and take care. Oh, and let's all thank Jasmine for contributing.
Hurrah!
Yeah.
Thank you.